President, we cannot neglect our obligation to ensure the human rights of migrants, because we were one of the first countries to adopt an implementation plan on the Global Migration Compact, the one-stop shop that we have in our local and national centres for supporting migrants' integration has been recognised as a good practice at international level. We're proud of being one of the countries which draws the fewest distinctions between migrants and our citizens in the areas of social protection, access to health and education. Against this backdrop, and having seen his exemplary work during his first mandate, Portugal is proud to be fully committed in ensuring the reappointment of Antonio Vitorino for a second mandate as the Director General of the International Organization for Migrants later this year. President, I will come back to the start of my remarks by recalling that in this year of anniversaries we must get back to the basics of international human rights law. We must ensure that we respect the human rights of all human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Now it's my pleasure to invite to the podium Her Excellency Joana Gomes Rosa Amado, Minister of Justice of Cabo Verde. Madam, please.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, President. President of the Human Rights Council, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. President, the Cabo Verde delegation congratulates you on your election, and we wish you every success in your mandate. On behalf of the government of Cabo Verde, I would like to begin by expressing our most sincere condolences and solidarity to the people of Turkey and Syria for the huge loss of life resulting from the earthquake which has affected your countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, in recent years, the international community's attention has been focused on efforts to eradicate and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Like many other states, Cabo Verde has shown great resilience during this challenging period. Since 1990, our tourism industry grew rapidly, which allowed us to achieve significant economic growth and reduce poverty more quickly than any other African nation. But like the rest of the world, Cabo Verde has seen its tourism industry face huge setbacks in 2020, leading to the destruction of many jobs and testing our health system. But our government supported its people in their resilience, and we have combated this disaster tirelessly. Despite the difficulties in transport, logistics for getting vaccinations to all 9 islands, we have vaccinated 70% of adults, which is the third highest rate in sub-Saharan Africa. We have also managed to overcome the setbacks caused by the drop in tourism. We have provided safe conditions for tourists. The World Health Organization has stated that the COVID-19 was a turning point. So there are now many countries in this room who can concentrate on doing more than merely combating COVID-19. We must seize this opportunity to focus our energy on combating long-standing on the Declaration on the Right to Development. It focuses on establishing an international economic order which promotes the development of all countries, including the least developed countries and small island developing states. It's absolutely vital that we make economic development a priority for all states and peoples. We must also bear in mind that the right to development reiterates the same kind of universal respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms which we must take into consideration when we discuss the abolition of the death penalty. Abolishing the death penalty and ensuring the universal right to development are two vital steps for ensuring that we have a fairer world. We have no way of knowing when another pandemic or major global crisis will strike. And this could divert our attention away from some of the most basic human rights abuses which continue to afflict us every day. President, in November of this year, Cabo Verde will present its Universal Periodic Review report. This is an opportunity for you to take stock of developments in promoting and protecting human rights in our country over the past 5 years, and we hope that you will all be present on that occasion. Cabo Verde is also standing for election to the Human Rights Council for the 2025-2027 period. Throughout our history as an independent nation, we have shown a high level of support for human rights in the areas I've mentioned and in many others as well. We will continue to be committed to defending human rights. This is our flagship. Thus, with your support, we hope to have the opportunity to work to improve human rights throughout the world as a member of the Council. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Madam Minister. We will continue with the video statement delivered by His Excellency José Manuel Álvarez Bueno, Minister for Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain.
Dirijo hoy de nuevo a este Consejo en uno de los momentos más complejos desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial para reafirmar el compromiso de España con un orden internacional basado en el respeto.
The sound quality is not good enough for interpretation.
Se cumplen 75 años de la adopción de la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos que reconoció por primera vez en la historia la igual
I have an announcement that we are having the difficulties with the interpretation, so can we start again, please? Sound quality is not very good.
Uno de los momentos más complejos desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial para reafirmar el compromiso de España con un orden internacional basado en el respeto de los derechos humanos y el multilateralismo. El próximo mes de diciembre se cumplen 75 años de la adopción de la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos que reconoció por primera vez en la historia la igual dignidad y el derecho a todos.
The sound quality of the video is not clear enough for the interpreters to be able to follow what the speaker is saying. Thank you for your understanding.
Que nos hemos comprometido colectivamente a respetar. Por eso, la defensa de la declaración es uno de los pilares de nuestra respuesta a los retos actuales.
I'm again being informed by the interpreters that the quality of the video is really bad, so they cannot translate. So maybe we can try to ask the Spanish delegation to provide us with a new video and use another slot for the presentation. So please, Secretariat, stop the video and we will continue with another speaker. Thank you. I'm really sorry for the quality of the video. We will try to sort it out bilaterally with the delegation of Spain. But now let me invite Her Excellency Helena Maris Kida, Minister of Justice, Constitutional and Religious Affairs of Mozambique, to the podium. Madam, thank you.
Muito bom dia a todos.
Very good morning to you all. President of the Human Rights Council, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, distinguished heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honoured to represent the government of the Republic of Mozambique at this, the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council. I do so reaffirming our respect for the promotion, protection, defence of human rights. I address this high-level segment in the Portuguese language. This is a language with over 260 million speakers across the Americas, Africa, Asia and Europe. So we hope that Portuguese will become an official language of the United Nations in the near future. I would like to welcome and congratulate the appointment of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, and the President of the Human Rights Council, Václav Balek. On the 3rd of January 2023, Mozambique became a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for the 2-year period 2023-2024. Our motto is peace and international security and sustainable development. In this light, His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, declared that we begin our mandate determined to use the humble experience of Mozambique in building peace through dialogue in order to contribute in a relevant fashion to building a more peaceful, harmonious and prosperous world. Mozambique is committed to defending the promotion of international peace, particularly on the African continent, the link between climate peace and security, the role of women and young people in peacekeeping, and combating terrorism and other evils that threat international peace and security, and searching for more opportunities for developing countries in international decisions through reforming multilateral institutions during our mandate on the Security Council. As part of our international obligations, particularly in institutional mechanisms, we adopted a presidential decree on the 18th of April which establishes the Interministerial Commission for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. This is a government body which will coordinate the preparation of reports and other communications by experts from regional and international bodies on human rights and international humanitarian law, as well as for the follow-up and implementation of recommendations at a domestic level. I'd like to highlight the work that we have carried out on implementing mechanisms, and thanks to our cooperation with our partners, we have drawn up the following documents: the action plan for implementing the recommendations of the 3rd cycle of the UPR. The aim of this is to promote compliance with the recommendations and gradually improve the human rights situation in Mozambique. We've also drawn up a multi-sectoral action plan on albinism for the period 2023 to 2027. The aim is to ensure that people with albinisms can enjoy their human rights against a backdrop of respect for the democratic rule of law and greater tolerance for differences. We've also drawn up a national plan for preventing and combating human trafficking. The aim of this is to eradicate this phenomenon, particularly amongst women and children. President, Mozambique remains committed to promoting gender equality and women's rights. We have made some important amendments to the family law, the General Statute of Civil Servants and the Criminal Code. Child protection has been strengthened through the adoption of the law against early marriage. This completely prohibits the under 18s from being married before they reach the age of majority, and it foresees prison sentences from 2 to 12 years for offenders. Mozambique is also acceding to the voluntary principles on security and human rights, and the UN guiding principles and business and human rights. With this in mind, we must underline the progress made to establish the National Working Group on these matters. This brings together government institutions, the private sector and civil society. The aim of this is to promote multi-sectoral dialogue linked to implementing the voluntary principles, as well as the establishment of a technical group in the province of Cabo Delgado. I'd also like to point out that last year we ratified 2 international instruments, and these were the Protocol for the African Charter on Human and People's Rights relating to the rights of older persons in Africa, and the Protocol to the African Charter of Human Rights relating to the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. I would also like to take this opportunity to state that we are currently undergoing the procedure for ratifying the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and its respective optional protocol. Thus, this strengthens our commitment to the 9 United Nations human rights core conventions. President, I would also like to recall that we welcome recommendations made in response to the humanitarian crisis in Cabo Delgado. With the arrival of troops from the Republic of Rwanda and the SADC State of Alert Force, the situation has been stabilised and we are seeing that people are voluntarily returning to their homes. The government, with this in mind, approved the programme for resilience and integrated development of northern regions. The main aim of this is to promote the recovery and resuming basic conditions for economic and social development. With this in mind, I carried out a mission to the province of Cabo Delgado earlier this month, namely in the districts of Palma, Mocimbo da Praia and Macomia. The aim is to convey the government's commitment to establishing the presence of state institutions, to monitoring the process of internal registration for displaced persons and restoring state infrastructure which was destroyed by terrorist attacks, namely courts, prosecutor's office, citizens assistance and sponsorship offices, registry and notary offices, as well as other facilities for criminal investigation services. Rebuilding and stabilising the Cabo Delgado province requires partnerships, and thus we intend to organise an international conference of donors for rebuilding and stabilising Cabo Delgado. We will inform you of the date in due course. We have made this province our priority because we have some internal resources and we can mobilise resources from our partners. In this context, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the UNDP for its efforts, because it is that UN body which is implementing the Stabilisation Recovery Project in the province. President, we need to have a cross-cutting response to terrorism which combats deep-seated causes of radicalisation and violent extremism. Fighting this phenomena must be able to count on all our efforts, but any such action must fully respect human rights, fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. Mozambique supports the drafting of a legally binding international instrument on transnational corporations and other business entities in the field of human rights, with a view to ending impunity and promoting their social responsibility and respect for human rights. We also recognise that there are certain factors, specifically the adverse effects of climate change, have an impact on the full and effective enjoyment of human rights by vulnerable people. So I'd like to take this opportunity to inform you that climate change continues to be a challenge for our country. Recently, in southern Mozambique, more specifically in the Maputo province, floods occurred. 4,000 homes were totally or partially flooded by the rainfall. The government and other stakeholders are currently undertaking operations to alleviate the suffering of those affected. President, I would like to conclude by reiterating Mozambique's trust in the Human Rights Council to constantly strengthen member states' capacity to achieve their human rights obligations, and so that they show universal effective respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms and safeguard human dignity and values. I would like to thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Minister. The last speaker for this morning is His Excellency Zacarias da Costa, Executive Secretary of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries. Sir.
President, Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, distinguished delegates, I am honoured to be able to participate in the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council. We are commemorating the 10th year of the CPLP's participation in the works of the Council. So I would like to underscore the very significant achievements made by our member countries in recent decades. Human rights are in the very DNA of the CPLP, and they permeate the community's activities. They are one of the founding bedrocks of the community of 9 member states. They are culturally diverse and they cover 4 continents, but they are brought together by a common language, and thus they build ties of solidarity and cooperation amongst each other. I'm very pleased to observe that the CPLP is a death penalty free area, and we pursue many projects and initiatives to promote economic, social and cultural development, the right to free and good quality education, the right to mobility and decent work. I would also like to show that we put people's prosperity and the planet's prosperity at the heart of our action. Fighting climate change is one of the major challenges that we face as a community. The CPLP also aims to strengthen its cooperation with the United Nations, notably by increasing the participation of the CPLP and its member states in the work of the Human Rights Council, and also through our efforts to establish national human rights institutions in all member states. We also strive to build institutional capacity for reporting to the human rights treaty bodies. We are also building the right to an adequate diet in partnership with the FAO. And when it comes to child labour, we're working to fight it in conjunction with the ILO, and we're working to defend and promote the human rights of persons with disabilities. Excellency, it's impossible to build a world in which everyone can fully enjoy their human rights on an equal basis without peace. So we are very concerned to see the outbreak of international conflicts which undermine the international stability which has been so painstakingly won over the past century. In order to tackle the difficulties we face, we must strengthen our investment in multilateralism. We must build more inclusive dialogues so that we have more inclusive and resilient societies. We must find collective responses to our problems. The community of Portuguese-speaking countries will continue to deploy efforts day in, day out for the purposes of peace, justice and equality. And with this in mind, I would like to draw your attention to the CPLP's endorsement to Brazil's candidacy for the 2024-2026 mandate in the Human Rights Council, as well as the candidacies of Cabo Verde for 2025-2027 and Timor-Leste 2027-2029. The election of members of the CPLP would reflect your recognition of the work of the members of the CPLP in the area of human rights over the past 26 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as I've already announced, this was the last speaker on my list for this morning, and we will have now a short break in order to rearrange a little bit for the continuation of the high-level segment. But now let me close the fourth meeting of the 52nd session. Thank you for your participation.
Then we can start, yeah? Excellencies, Distinguished participants, I hereby declare open the fifth meeting of the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council. We will continue with the high-level segment. I have the honor to give the floor by video to His Excellency Mr. Ian Borg, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade of Malta. The video, please.
President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council. I wish to congratulate His Excellency Václav Bálek of Czechia on his election as President of the Human Rights Council. We look forward to working with you during 2023. I also wish to congratulate His Excellency Volker Türk, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, for his recent appointment. Our support to OHCHR is unequivocal, and I look forward to continue our fruitful collaboration with your office. Mr. President, a year ago, Russia's brutally devastating war was just 4 days in. This Council acted quickly at a special session with the establishment of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry in Ukraine to ensure accountability. A year later, the devastation in Ukraine continues. Civilian infrastructure is indiscriminately targeted. Civilians are being left without the most basic necessities in the dead of winter. Children have been forcibly deported away from their families to Russia. Thousands of Ukrainians, mostly women and children, have fled the largest population movement due to the conflict in Europe since the Second World War. The war's repercussions have been severe, and not only in Ukraine. This act of aggression is having worldwide implications, including on food security and energy supplies. Last Friday, as UN Security Council President, I presided over a meeting recalling the first year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The meeting was a sobering reminder of what is at stake if those who have pledged for over 77 years to act as guardians of the UN Charter fail to do so. Mr. President, this year we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We welcome the High Commissioner's focus on upholding the human rights obligations we have all freely subscribed to. We also welcome the work of the human rights treaty bodies, as well as the HRC's special procedures and investigative mechanisms in identifying human rights issues that require the attention of member states. Malta continues to support the Human Rights Council in all its activities, including its work on justice and accountability, and the Universal Periodic Review. We're also proud to be among those member states that have presented their midterm review following the third UPR cycle. Mr. President, we remain concerned about the appalling human rights situation in different countries. In Afghanistan, we are seeing the reimposition of laws and the restrictions that have eliminated women and girls' public space, closed their schools and restricted them from any form of employment. Peaceful protesters are also facing severe restrictions in Belarus and Russia. In 2022, this Council acted to respond to the deteriorating situation in Iran at its special session in November and established a fact-finding mission. We urge Iran to fully cooperate with the mission and to take all necessary measures to ensure that women's rights are fully safeguarded. Syria is another situation of concern. We urge the Syrian authorities to act decisively and abide by their international obligations to protect the rights of their citizens. Mr. President, Malta continues to advocate further strengthening for the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons. Similarly, we need to be ever mindful of the plight of children, particularly in conflict areas, as highlighted in our UNSC presidency event earlier this month on children and armed conflict. Our work at the HRC should result in allowing children to be children, enjoying their childhood, families, and right to education. The Safe Schools Declaration can serve as a beacon for children to receive an education in a safe and enabling environment. Gender equality is an essential part of our life as a nation. While challenges remain, Malta is working hard to overcome stereotypical pressures that may hinder women's activity and their role in society. In 2022, we in fact published our gender equality and mainstreaming strategy, an action plan focused on creating an equal society and overcome discrimination and structural inequality. Mr. President, media freedom and the safety of journalists are vital components in our democratic society. Over the past years, we have decisively acted to strengthen journalists' role in promoting free and open debates, and we are committed to continue doing so. Combating racism is another challenge we all face. The government has implemented the I Belong program, which provides a framework specifically tailored for the integration of migrants into society. While there is more work to be done, we are convinced that integration is a key issue in combating racism. Furthermore, implementation of our national anti-racism strategy is continuing on the basis of the pillars of equality, diversity, interaction, and participation. Mr. President, human rights are often described as the United Nations' third pillar, and thus a vital component together with security and development. All member states, large and small, should prioritize implementation of international human rights standards. Only in this way can our citizens' individual rights be protected. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the honor to give the floor via video to His Excellency Mr. Jeffrey Onyema, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Nigeria. Video, please.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the very outset, let me on behalf of the government of Nigeria congratulate you, Excellency Mr. Václav Balej, on your well-deserved election as President of the 17th cycle of the Human Rights Council. I take this opportunity to also congratulate other members of the Bureau. As you assume the huge responsibility of leading the work of the Council in the year 2023, rest assured of Nigeria's unwavering support and cooperation in the discharge of your mandates. Permit me to further seize the opportunity to congratulate other newly elected members of the Council and pledge Nigeria's commitment to supporting you in the realization of the solemn mandate of this Council. It has always been my utmost pleasure to address this meeting over the years on many important issues, and today, not least because it will be the last time I address the Council in my capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Our world continues to grapple with multiple and interlinked global dynamics, including the sad reality of the last COVID-19 pandemic, challenges of irregular migration, knowledge gaps, climate change crises, and the impacts of the conflict in Ukraine that have led to the three-dimensional predicament of food, energy, and financial crises, among others. Notwithstanding these known challenges, however, Nigeria remains firm and resolute in its commitment to deepen collaborations with stakeholders in the onerous efforts to overcome the crises that daily confront humanity through sustainable and resilient recovery strategies. In this regard, the government of Nigeria will ceaselessly continue to explore multiple alternatives and enabling environments for renewed economic activities, to attain socio-economic well-being for the teeming millions of its citizens. Indeed, the government has continued to prioritize the expansion of the sub-segment of the agricultural sector through varying degrees of incentives for the micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises. The overall objective being the need to create millions of jobs for our people. And indeed, one of the laudable initiatives put in place by the Central Bank of Nigeria, known as Anchor Borrowers Program, has prioritized self-sufficiency in food production and promoted pathways to sustainable agriculture. Mr. President, one global issue that has profoundly impacted local economies is climate change. Climate change reduces opportunity and prosperity, and many have exploited these challenges to expand transnational organized crime. To mitigate the impact of climate change-related disasters such as flooding, soil erosion, desertification, air pollution, and related challenges, the government of Nigeria embarked on measures that address critical ecological challenges across the country. Notwithstanding the sad experience of multiple flooding across many parts of our nation last year, Nigeria has taken practical steps to adopt a national climate change strategy as part of efforts to sustainably achieve our global net zero aspiration and mitigate these avoidable environmental and ecological challenges. The government is committed to carbon credits as vital tool for achieving Nigeria's climate goals, while demonstrating considerable readiness to finance sustainable economic development. The global economic downturn has led to higher public debt at unprecedented pre-pandemic sovereign debt ratios. This is further exacerbated by international lending systems that deny developing economies sustainable borrowing rates. Without ambitious actions, vital public financial resources will continue to be channeled to creditors at the expense of domestic health, social intervention to assist the poor, and meeting other socio-economic financing needs. Nigeria therefore underscores the urgent need for member states to stand in solidarity in the renewed call for a review or total overhaul of international financial and debt architecture. Mr. President, equality of all and respect for human dignity are essential and core principles of nation building. We have continued to reposition and strengthen the capacity of our security agencies through a robust security sector reform to combat all forms of security challenges that daily confront us as a country, while also making considerable progress with support from friendly countries as we work assiduously to address multiple security challenges. At the regional level, Nigeria continues to work tirelessly with other friendly member states of the Economic Community of West African States and other regional blocs to collectively address the problems of terrorism, piracy, trans-border crimes, illicit drug and human trafficking. Also in addressing the challenges of unconstitutional change of government. Need I underscore, therefore, the need for all UN member states to work closely and concertedly to tackle many of these challenges that daily threaten civilization, as well as the ongoing efforts being made in the accelerated implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, in concert with the dictum that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Mr. President, Nigeria is at an inflection point in history, considering our recently concluded general elections 3 days ago. The government of Nigeria recognized that good governance is nurtured through free, fair, credible, and transparent elections, and sustained by strident efforts to uphold standards and democratic norms. Nigeria invested hugely to strengthen the framework for free and fair elections. Consequently, I am delighted to announce that His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari's administration will, among other laudable achievements, be warmly remembered for having bequeathed a sustainable democratic culture by signing the Electoral Act 2021 as amended, with landmark provisions that guarantee transparency and inclusive electoral processes. May I seize this opportunity to reiterate the deepened commitment of the government of Nigeria to continually abide by the rule of law and advancement of the fundamental freedoms of its people. As the world marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, our collective actions must recognize, acknowledge, and deepen the promotion and protection of cultures and the human rights of all, and not the rights of a few. It is by ensuring this sole objective that one of the most important panaceas for the attainment of international peace and security will be attained. I must not conclude these remarks without firmly expressing in the strongest possible terms a condemnation of all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Nigeria reaffirms unequivocal support for and commitment to the effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. Member states and relevant stakeholders must demonstrate unwavering commitment to the philosophy of Ubuntu by frontally and concertedly condemning all manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia in their countries. Mr. President, in keeping with our obligations as member states of this noble organization, and as Nigeria prepares for election to the Human Rights Council, the government and people of our nation will continue to work to uphold the tenets of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I reiterate the full and resolute cooperation of my delegation with instituted human rights mechanisms in line with acceptable norms, rules, and statutes of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Finally, permit me to re-echo my words during the 49th session of the Human Rights Council last year on the imperative to address a deliberate slide in our work as it relates to the politicization of human rights issues and noticeable doublespeak in the international human rights system and advocacy. As member states of the United Nations, the time-honored tenets of multilateralism and guiding principles of human rights must remain the gold standard. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. I have the honor to give the floor via video to His Excellency Mr. Mario Adolfo Bucaro Flores, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Guatemala. The video, please.
Señor Presidente.
President, I'm honored to address the Human Rights Council on behalf of Alejandro Giamatti Falla, President of Guatemala. I would like to congratulate Ambassador Václav Balek on his election to the presidency of the Council. Guatemala will provide you with its full support as you go about your mandate with the other members of the Bureau. 1 year ago, the brother country of Ukraine suffered the use of force and unjustified aggression by the Russian Federation. This terrible situation is one which we condemn, and we condemn the Russian Federation's actions which have violated human rights, the principles of international law, and had global impacts. President Khatamai has on a number of occasions stated that we cannot fall silent when humans are suffering, when the shadow of death hangs over us because of senseless wars. More than ever, we must promote democracy, peace, and diplomatic solutions to disputes. Guatemala is a pacifist nation. We respect international law unless we call for a ceasefire and end to this dreadful war. The solution must respect sovereignty, Ukraine's territorial integrity, and human rights, as well as the security of all countries in order to build international peace and security. President, on the 10th of December, we will be commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's one of the most important documents ever adopted by the United Nations. This provides us with an opportunity to rekindle its spirit and honour the achievements we have made without forgetting outstanding challenges for the world. Much of the potential of human rights is to inspire and help us build a better, fairer and more prosperous world. I would like to reiterate my country's resolute commitment to defending human rights and fundamental freedoms for everybody without any distinctions. In order to build a fairer, more sustainable future, President, we must ensure that everyone's voice can be heard, including that of indigenous peoples. That's why Guatemala will work both domestically and internationally to promote their rights. We urge all states to commit to the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We shall continue to foster measures for universal recognition of their rights and to ensure that Indigenous peoples can take part in the work of the United Nations, particularly the councils. With that in mind, we will give our full support for implementing measures so that we can achieve this noble aim. Similarly, Guatemala supports all the activities undertaken in the framework of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. We recognise their vital importance for social inclusion and cohesion, as well as the cultural rights, health and justice rights of Indigenous peoples. They contribute to sustainable development, help preserve biodiversity because of their ancestral and traditional knowledge, which brings humanity closer to nature. Guatemala also welcomes the holding of the first session of the Permanent Forum of Persons of African Descent. We reiterate our support for drawing up a universal declaration to promote the full respect of their human rights. Guatemala respects its commitments as a founder member of the United Nations. We're fully committed to strengthening all UN bodies and to have an open policy of cooperation with the Council mechanisms. Thus, we give special priority to a constructive and respectful dialogue. This was reflected by our participation on last 25th of January in the fourth cycle of the UPR. I would like to thank those who took a constructive part in that dialogue and the support provided by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for building national capacity to implement accepted recommendations. Similarly, we will continue to cooperate with human rights treaty bodies. In October of last year, Guatemala was reviewed by the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and we will shortly be submitting our periodic reports to the Committee Against Torture on the ICCPR, on the rights of the child and the rights of persons with disabilities. In the spirit of cooperation, I'm pleased to inform you that Guatemala is running to be a member of the Human Rights Council for the 2025-2027 period. May I recall that we were part of the Council at its very outset during the period 2006 to 2008 and again from 2010 to 2013. We hope to have your support, and we will thus make an active contribution which is also objective, transparent, for promoting and protecting the human rights for all. We also appreciate the cooperation provided by the UNHCR country office in Guatemala, led by Mr. Mika Caner-Vavori. Guatemala is a sovereign democratic country. According to our constitution, international laws in the area of human rights prevail. We're committed to strengthening our democracy, and that's why we fully respect the principle of non-interference in internal affairs and the sovereignty of other states. We're working to strengthen our institutions and to achieve a robust and resilient democracy. That's why we will be holding legislative elections on the 25th of June this year. I would like to round off by reiterating that prevention is vital for avoiding human rights violations in any part of the world. We must have an effective and relevant multilateral system. That's why the United Nations values self-recognition of challenges and cooperation amongst member states. Cooperation must follow national priorities, particularly the unity of member states. That's how we will be able to fight current challenges together and build a better world. Thank you.
I have the honor to give the floor via video His Excellency Mr. Ratislav Kasher, Minister of European and Foreign Affairs of Slovakia. Video, please.
Distinguished President of the Human Rights Council, Ministers, colleagues, honorable guests. The beginning of the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council in 2022 coincided with the start of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine. I deplore that after a year, the war is still going on and continues to have a devastating impact on human lives. In times like this, the Human Rights Council needs a strong in principle leadership. I congratulate you, Ambassador Balek, on assuming the presidency of this body, and I wish you a successful mandate. You can count on Slovakia support in your endeavor. Mr. President, the war in Ukraine has been shaping our work in the HRC. Let me point out one of the false pretexts that led to the Russian war, of the aggression, the alleged violation and deprivation of the rights of persons belonging to Russian minority in eastern Ukraine. Yet the fact is that it is Russia and its armed forces which have caused massive violation of human rights in Ukraine. These war crimes and gross and systematic violations of human rights and international humanitarian law leaves a deep scar on the whole population. I therefore strongly appeal for a robust international approach in investigating these inhumane crimes. We owe it to the victims and the survivors in Bucha, Mariupol, Izium, and civilians in other Ukrainian cities. They rightfully turn their expectation towards the United Nations and the grantor of peace and justice, and we cannot let them down. For us, the bottom line is clear. There must be no impunity for those committing these crimes. The Human Rights Council already made an important step in holding those responsible for human rights violations accountable, and I consider essential that the Commission of Inquiry established by this body a year ago as a response to the Russian brutal aggression will continue to implement its mandate, and that we will use the tools at our disposal to bring perpetrators to justice. Yet what Russia has been doing in Ukraine should not be seen in isolation. The war has revealed substantial decrease of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Russia. Repressive legislation and police targets against human rights defenders, political opposition, media, and journalists follow the one and only objective: to silence any remaining independent and critical voices in the country. If not addressed, we will witness a gradual collapse of civil society, independent media in Russia. I therefore call on this Council to continue addressing human rights situation on the ground. Mr. President, the human rights situation in Belarus has been with the Council for quite some time. However, with exceeding the number of political prisoners, about 1,000, it has never been as urgent as today. Whatever action the HRC will take towards Belarus, it should reflect the sharp deterioration of human rights in the country. We need a specific and targeted response to the ongoing persecutions by Lukashenko regime against its own population. To put it simply, this must stop. Let me now turn to domestic situation in my own country. Over the past couple of years, Slovakia has become a vocal advocate for media freedom and safety of journalists. A story of an extremely brave individual has compelled us to take on this mission. A week ago, we marked 5 years since journalist Jan Kuciak was murdered in Slovakia, and he paid the highest price for doing his work, while exposing frauds and corruption committed by, at the time, political and business elites. This was a watershed moment for the whole society. Not only this was a crime against an individual, it was an attack on our fundamental values, because democracy and the rule of law were directly targeted by this appalling act. At the same time, the killing of a journalist has led to profound legislative and policy changes in my own country. Likewise, we have strengthened our foreign policy engagement in support for media freedom and safety of journalists. They deserve our utmost attention. We must guarantee they will be able to report freely with no restrictions and no interference. They cannot be faced with a choice between publishing the truth or saving their lives or protecting their families. And so the access to objective and fact-based information, both online and offline, must be respected. Slovakia will support more active engagement of the Human Rights Council in defending media freedom and freedom on the internet. These freedoms are key to strengthening democracy and building resilient societies. Mr. President, last year we witnessed dramatic human rights violations and abuses that within conflicts and crises in many parts of the world. Hence, the upcoming 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights later this year will be no time for complacency. Rather, we need to recommit common understanding of human rights belonging to every single person. We need to protect and strengthen multilateral human rights system as we know it. We don't need to reinvent or rewrite it, but we have to implement what we have already agreed upon. The Human Rights Council must remain firm in addressing human rights violations and abuses worldwide. Its credibility as the main UN human rights body depends on how credible are its 47 members. They must lead by an example. And on the other hand, I see it as our joint task that we do not let those who commit war crimes and other gross human rights violations to become members of this noble body. In these challenging times, the newly appointed UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has a more enormous task. He must restore trust and confidence in human rights. To this aim, Slovakia will support his efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor via video to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Schallenberg, Federal Minister for European and International Affairs of Austria. Please, the video.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 1 year ago, Russian forces invaded Ukraine in blatant violation of international law. Since that day, Russia has waged an illegal, unjustified and unprovoked war against Ukraine, targeting civilians and infrastructure. This brutal war causes enormous destruction and inconceivable human suffering. Austria clearly reiterates its unwavering support and solidarity with Ukraine, with the Ukrainian government and with the people of Ukraine. Independent experts have meticulously gathered evidence of serious human rights violations and breaches of international humanitarian law in Ukraine. We must ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable. There must not be impunity for these war crimes. Austria fully supports the efforts of the ICC, the Commission of Inquiry in Vienna, and the OSCE Moscow mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a systemic competition for the principles of international law and the universality of human rights. This poses a fundamental threat to all of us. Barely 13% of countries worldwide are still fully fledged democracies. We are a minority, and we have to be willing to fight for our way of life. Many people around the world experience violation of the human rights on a daily basis. This requires our full attention and decisive action. At a time of perma-crisis, we have to make sure that our joint commitment to the universality of human rights and the rule of law remains a top priority. Human rights are the foundation for free societies and thriving communities. Austria has always been and will remain a strong supporter of the international human rights system. Together, we must resist all attempts to undermine our open and free societies. As our world unfolds increasingly in the digital space, the need for our rights to be respected both online and offline becomes even greater. We also need to ensure that human rights are respected in the development of new technologies. Existing international legal norms must be fully implemented and effective in all areas of life. Excellencies, I'm deeply concerned about the alarming humanitarian situation in many places, such as Afghanistan, Iran, Belarus, Syria, Yemen, Ethiopia, to only name a few. In recent months, the dire human rights situation of Afghan women and girls has even worsened. The erosion of women's rights and the exclusion from public life is totally unacceptable. Women and girls must be able to participate freely and fully in all aspects of public and private life, without threat of violence, reprisals, or intimidation. In Iran, there have been waves of protests in recent years, demanding justice, equality, and respect for human rights. These legitimate calls for human rights have been met with unnecessary and disproportionate violence and repression. Let me be clear. Women and girls must be able to participate in public life on equal footing with men. Young people need to know that they can express their opinions peacefully and freely without fear of arrest and imprisonment. This is why women's rights and gender equality continue to be at the front and center of Austrian foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 2023 marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30th anniversary of the World Conference on Human Rights held in Vienna in 1993. As a contribution to the Human Rights Anniversary Year 2023, Austria, together with the High Commissioner and prominent human rights defenders, is organizing a high-level human rights symposium in Vienna on the 6th of June. Let me be clear, the universality of human rights is not subject to negotiation. Any attempts of relativization or challenge are unacceptable. We can only move forward on our common commitment to human rights if we return to the spirit of Vienna, where all human rights are placed on an equal footing. Protecting and defending human rights requires continuous commitment and effort. Without human rights for all, there can be no lasting peace, no long-term security, and no sustainable development. In this endeavor, you can count on Austria's unwavering support. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the honor of via video to His Excellency Mr. Alain Ganou, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Regional Integration and International Trade, Minister for Land Transport and Light Rail of Mauritius via video. Video, please.
Secretary General of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Allow me to express my congratulations to Ambassador Balek of the Czech Republic on his assumption of the post of President of the Human Rights Council for the year 2023. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the events we are set to commemorate this year, namely the 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30 years of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, serve as an important reminder of our common commitment to upholding human rights, which are universal, interdependent, and indivisible, and are the foundation for peace, justice, and development. Human rights can only be advanced in a context of peace and security and a conducive environment for development. During his New Year's greeting 2023, the United Nations Secretary General laid emphasis on the importance of peace. To some, peace is the absence of war. For a small island developing state like Mauritius, peace would improve the ability to deal with climate change and help curb rising food commodity and energy prices. The long-lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, conflicts, and the accelerating effects of climate change have severely impacted the advancement of SDGs and are affecting basic human rights. The rising cost of living around the world has driven many families into poverty. We therefore need to find the most appropriate ways to address these concerns so that the present and future generations are given the best possible opportunities and the safest world possible. Despite the obstacles to economic growth arising from COVID-19, the government of Mauritius took several measures to alleviate difficulties faced by our people, such as free distribution of food and medicine to the most vulnerable, the provision of the self-employed assistance scheme, the introduction of the wage assistance scheme, especially for those earning less than 50,000 rupees per month, that is USD 1,250, and the small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, interest-free loan scheme, and other fiscal incentives. However, the provision of social protection for the people, including the continued grant of universal and free health care, free education till tertiary level in all public institutions, pensions to the elderly, widowed, and orphans can only be sustained in a context of global economic progress. Going forward, Mr. President, Mauritius will continue pursuing actions to further promote and protect human rights. Today, climate change is a universal reality. No single country is spared by its impacts, and no single country can fight the effects of climate change alone. Floods, droughts, and extreme weather conditions have become part of our lives. As a result, adaptation measures are increasingly being prioritized as compared to mitigation measures. Last year, I informed the high-level segment of the enactment of the Children's Act 2020. With the coming into force of this act, the minimum age for marriage is now 18 years in the Republic of Mauritius. Mauritius has equally promulgated the Child Sex Offender Registration Act and set up a children's court. The first objective of these landmark pieces of legislation is to ensure that the rights of children are better protected and an adequate regulatory framework is put in place. While continuing our engagement with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mauritius welcomed last year another mandate holder, namely the Special Rapporteur on Sale and Sexual Exploitation of Children. She was the fifth to visit Mauritius in recent years. We take on board observations of mandate holders and we renew our collaboration with them. As part of the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review, Mauritius will be submitting its national report in October. We look forward to informing the Human Rights Council in January 2024 of the progress achieved in the field of human rights in Mauritius since our last review in 2018. Mr. President, in concluding, Chair, let me thank all Member States for their increasing support to the Trust Fund, which has been set up to facilitate the work of LCDs and SIDS in the Human Rights Council. Since its establishment, the Trust Fund has financed the participation of over 180 delegates from the 72 eligible countries. We reiterate our appreciation to the donors who continue to believe in the benefit of building capacity to advance human rights. Their continued support speaks strongly to us on their vision of human rights. I assure you of the full cooperation of my delegation during your mandate, Mr. President. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I have the honor to give the floor via video to His Excellency Mr. M. Bogdan Lucian Oresco, Ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Roumanie, via video. Video, please.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Mr. High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, allow me to congratulate His Excellency Ambassador Václav Balek, Permanent Representative of Czechia, on presiding the Human Rights Council and assure him of Romania's full support. I also congratulate the High Commissioner Volker Turk on his recent nomination and on the substantive work already undertaken to promote and protect human rights, particularly in these very difficult times. In that context, I wish to express Romania's full support to the independence of the High Commissioner and his office.
President, dear colleagues, this is the first session in which Romania takes part as a voting member of this Council after its previous mandate in 2014. We are grateful for your support and for your trust. Romania will remain true to its commitments, its long-standing tradition of strong engagement to multilateral diplomacy, international rule of law, the respect for international human rights law, and universal values. Romania's determination to bring a valuable contribution to peace and security, development and human rights is as stronger as ever. Human rights are universal, inalienable, indivisible, and interrelated, and there is no human dignity without human rights. Our position remains firm and principled. Human rights violations should be approached appropriately whenever and wherever they occur. And upholding a resilient international world order is critical at this very moment. Political and economic tensions are mounting, eroding democracies and impeding our aspirations for peace, stability and development. All states have the responsibility to take action, to respect, protect and fulfill human rights within and beyond their borders. The international legal order must be protected at all costs, and the implementation of the global human rights system must be strengthened. This is an urgent necessity and not an option. The unjustified and unprovoked war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation against Ukraine is also a war on the right of a nation to freely choose its own destiny and a war against democracy. As we have recently marked 1 year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I would like to reconfirm Romania's firm and unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The UN General Assembly resolution on principles for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, also co-sponsored by Romania and adopted on February 23rd with a wide majority, is a clear, determined call for peace based on the principles of the UN Charter. Our condemnation of unacceptable atrocities, human rights and international humanitarian law violations should be further and further articulated. No effort should be spared towards ensuring accountability for the crimes committed by the Russian Federation in Ukraine and towards reparations to the many victims. Romania values the efforts by the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights to document cases of conflict-related sexual violence against women and girls, as well as of other serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights of prisoners of war. Ukraine's victory can only be defined by Ukraine itself. It is its own legal and moral right. In turn, we must continue the multidimensional support efforts for enhancing Ukraine's resilience and resistance against the ongoing aggression of the Russian Federation. We need to engage in a consistent international dialogue and coordination on the post-conflict reconstruction of Ukraine based on a comprehensive and well-grounded plan. Other massive challenges also call for the international community's swift response. We welcome the UN appeals for Turkey and Syria after the recent devastating earthquakes. Romania has been one of the first countries to react and has delivered humanitarian aid to both countries. Whether we speak of war or natural disasters, both types of crises bring immense human suffering, human rights violations, but also massive economic costs for reconstruction. Your Excellencies, in these turbulent times, reinvigorating our commitments to universal values and fundamental principles couldn't have been timelier. The High Commissioner and his office initiative to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action are commendable. Mr. President, dear colleagues, human rights, democracy and rule of law are quintessential for this Council's activity. It is also our first mandate priority as member of this Council. We thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for their efforts to organize 4 editions so far of the Forum on Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law. Romania will continue to foster such discussions by initiating a new draft resolution during the current session. The resolution will inform the 5th edition of the Forum in 2024 and aims to bring into attention the important links between democracy and climate change. We look forward to working with all member states for its consensual adoption by the Council. As for the other main priorities of our mandate, we will be working towards protecting and promoting human rights of women and girls, countering discrimination, xenophobia and racism, and enabling freedom of expression. Dear colleagues, I wish you and your delegations fruitful debates and deliberations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor via video message to His Excellency Mr. Subramanian Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs of India, via video. Video, please.
Mr. President, I congratulate you on your election as the President of the Council and assure you of my delegation's full cooperation. Let me reiterate that India remains steadfast in its commitment to take all possible steps to ensure fullest enjoyment of basic human rights of our people, including good governance and inclusive and sustainable development. As a member of the Council, India works with other members of the Council as well as observers towards building consensus with a view to ensure that the Council is able to fulfill its basic mandate. We give equal priority to all basic human rights, whether civil and political or economic, social and cultural, as they are indivisible and interdependent. Further, we will continue to extend our cooperation, as in the past, to the Office of the High Commissioner and various other mechanisms of the Council, including special rapporteurs and universal periodic review. As we mark 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 30 years of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, I would like to underline that the universality of all basic human rights. They embody India's civilizational ethos and democratic values, the edifice on which contemporary India is being built. It is a happy coincidence that India has also been celebrating 75 years of our own independence. The strong framework of our secular and democratic polity has served us well in this journey. Our Constitution guarantees civil and political rights as fundamental rights. It also has provisions for the progressive realization of economic, social, and cultural rights. Our independent judiciary has been playing its expected role in that regard, as indeed have our media and civil society. Our approach to human rights reflects our experience as a developing country with a strong sense of global solidarity. Our civilizational ethos, which envisages a strong commitment to the welfare of entire humanity, ensures harmony between our domestic and international policies. Mr. President, the last 3 years have been difficult for the entire world, and developing countries have been hit the hardest. Challenges of the COVID pandemic, rising prices of fuel, fertilizers and food grains, and growing debt burdens have adversely affected the enjoyment of human rights by people globally. Our collective efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals have been seriously set back. We believe that sustainable and inclusive development is the key to the enjoyment of various basic human rights. During the past 75 years, we have made tremendous progress in our own development journey. India's model of SDG localization has successfully integrated the 2030 agenda from national to local governance all the way to individual households. Under Prime Minister Modi's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas and Sabka Prayas, that is inclusive governance and development with everyone's participation, trust and contribution, India is steadfastly committed to ensuring a life of dignity for our people. During the COVID, hundreds of millions accessed free food and received money in their bank accounts. All this was done through digital delivery, without discrimination of any kind. The same objectivity and fairness characterizes our social welfare programs, our health access, and ensuring basic facilities. We have accorded a high priority to gender inclusion and empowerment of women. In fact, we endeavor to promote a woman-led development. India has also been at the forefront of recognizing and protecting the equal rights of transgender persons. We have taken several steps with the objective that business enterprises respect human rights. With our abiding commitment to ensuring food and nutrition security, we have decided to continue the supply of free food grains to the poorest households for the next year. To ensure universal health coverage, we are now implementing one of the world's largest programs to provide accessible and affordable health care to over 500 million beneficiaries. Nearly 96 million connections to clean cooking fuel have been provided to poor households to specially safeguard the health of women and children. And over 78 million households have been provided tap water connections since the launch of the Water is Life Jal Jeevan mission in 2019. All these steps have enabled people to enjoy the basic human rights. Mr. President, India has always played an active role in global promotion and protection of human rights, including through our development partnerships. Our partnerships have focused on building capacity and development of human resources, as well as infrastructure, in accordance with the priorities of our partner, while abiding by principles of fiscal responsibility, transparency, and viability. Our international development assistance to 78 nations, that includes grants and soft lines of credit, speaks of this approach. Our commitment was also evident in our response to the COVID pandemic. We have supplied vaccines to 99 countries and 2 UN entities, as well as medicines to over 150 countries. Mr. President, we have been at the forefront of dealing with other global challenges which adversely impact on human rights, especially terrorism. India believes that the world must resolutely display zero tolerance in this regard. After all, terrorism is the most indefensible violation of human rights and has no justification in any circumstances. Its perpetrators must therefore always be held accountable. Mr. President, we have taken a lead in bringing together international coalitions such as the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for the Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, as well as in helping other countries to address the challenge of climate. Mission Life, launched recently by Prime Minister Modi alongside Secretary General Guterres, promotes a sustainable way of living based on values of conservation and moderation through a mass movement. During our G20 presidents, it will be our endeavor to find viable solutions for the various crises confronting the international community. So let me conclude by reiterating that India will continue to take all the requisite steps to ensure that we meet all our human rights obligations and ensure that our people enjoy all their basic human rights. We will also continue to contribute to global promotion and protection of human rights, including through our development partnerships. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor via video His Excellency Mr. Rogelio Maita Maita, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the plurinational state of Bolivia, via video message.
Mr. President, Mr. High Commissioner, Excellencies, distinguished observers, brothers and sisters, it is an honor for me to address you on behalf of the government of the plurinational state of Bolivia, a member state of this council, which is now beginning its 52nd session. We wish to start our participation today recalling that human rights are not a privilege, nor a gift. They are an inalienable set of attributes for all human beings, everywhere in the world, under any political banner. It is the duty of states and international organisations to defend those and ensure that none of us loses them or has them restricted. That is the importance of the work that we are starting here now. Unfortunately, a good deal remains to be done. A multidimensional global crisis is affecting millions of people, testing the ability of the international community to provide effective responses. The economies of the countries of the global south are suffering the effects of the imbalance left behind by the COVID-19 pandemic. Inequalities and shortages of resources have worsened, both in the Middle East with the recent disasters and in Eastern Europe with the military conflict. It is urgent to think now about humanity's future. We cannot afford to ignore the fact that climate change is a daily disaster, which we must remedy in order that our brothers and sisters may be able to live decently, produce their food, and stop Africa's lifeblood being lost through displacement and enforced migration. It is not possible that we help to rebuild our shared home without guaranteeing food, shelter, work, health and education for all. In that context, Bolivia is promoting the culture of peace, cooperation and dialogue through diplomacy of the peoples for life. We believe in a world where everyone's voice is heard without distinction. To achieve that, multilateralism is the mechanism that guarantees respect and cooperation among states, independently of their economic or military power. In addition to the war, we also have a duty to end hunger and poverty. It is crucial that we strengthen gender equality and provide drinking water for all of humanity. The effective enjoyment of human rights is also related to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. I reiterate and reaffirm Bolivia's strong commitment to implementation of those. To achieve those goals, Bolivia has launched the Economic and Social Development Plan 2021 to 2025, rebuilding the economy to live well, towards industrialization with substitution of imports, in order to achieve a society and a state that are more inclusive, participatory and democratic, applying the good living approach. In that context, and thinking about a world that is trying to build back after the pandemic and in the midst of a climate crisis, we have started to build our future around the following pillars. Economic diversification with industrialization and substitution of imports. Job creation, equitable distribution of income, strengthening of citizens' rights, and strengthening of the fundamental rights of the Bolivian people and protection of Mother Earth. Mr. President, ensuring the promotion and protection of human rights involves protecting life and dignity in all their forms. And today, while we hear every day discussion of arms, a new arms race, it is difficult to understand who is right and what road to follow. We perhaps should be leaving aside the arguments and returning to dialogue with just one item on the agenda, leaving wars and death behind. Otherwise there will be no planet, no life and no human rights to protect. Bolivia has lived sustained by hope and we would like to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Park Jin, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. Video, please.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, let me start by offering my heartfelt condolences to those affected by the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Korea stands in solidarity with the people of these two countries, and we are committed to supporting recovery efforts in any way possible. I also wish to congratulate Mr. Volker Turk on his recent appointment as High Commissioner. Under his able leadership, I'm confident that the OHCHR will fulfill its critical role of promoting human rights in all corners of the world. Mr. President, today we find ourselves at a turning point in history. The world is facing conflicts and divisions on a scale not seen in decades. The challenges we face today, from the ongoing war in Ukraine to the economic downturn and climate change, have far-reaching implications for human rights. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we should draw inspiration from its visionary mission to address these global challenges. The Declaration serves as a reminder that human rights are essential for freedom, justice, and peace. And as a nation aspiring to become a global pivotal state, or GPS, Korea is committed to working towards this end. At home, we recently ratified the International Convention on Enforced Disappearance, as well as the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And globally, Korea will continue to engage constructively with the Human Rights Council with a focus on the following areas. First, we recognize the significant impact of new technologies on human rights and made it a priority to address their implications. In this regard, we will table our third resolution at the 53rd session to make meaningful progress on this important topic. We look forward to working closely with member states on this resolution. I also wish to share that Korea is creating a digital Bill of Rights. The bill aims to define the right to enjoy digital technologies. We believe this will help to shape a global digital order that prioritizes human rights and dignity. Secondly, we believe the Council should play a greater role in assisting developing countries build capacity to advance human rights. This can be achieved by providing technical assistance, sharing best practices, and mobilizing resources. To this end, Korea is dedicated to sharing our experiences and providing funding through OHCHR. Thirdly, we recognize that as crises escalate, the most vulnerable, especially women and girls, bear the brunt of the impact. And as a country with a history of women and girls being victimized as comfort women, we are committed to advancing the women, peace, and security agenda. In this regard, under our Action with Women and Peace initiative, we are providing a global platform for dialogue and galvanizing action to uphold the rights of women and girls. In fact, at our latest conference, we tried to shine a spotlight on Asian women fighting for peace on the front lines, including the women and girls in Afghanistan. Finally, Korea hopes to continue working with the Japanese government to restore the honor and dignity of the comfort women and help heal their psychological wounds. Mr. President, last week marked 1 year since Russia invaded Ukraine. The impact of the war on civilians has been devastating, with thousands of lives lost and many more uprooted. As the High Commissioner noted, accountability is one of the remedies to heal the wounds of war. Allegations of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law must be thoroughly investigated, and perpetrators must be brought to justice. We call upon UN human rights mechanisms for broader engagement to this end. While it is important to remain focused on Ukraine, we cannot overlook other parts of the world that demand our attention, especially North Korea. As one of the most repressive regimes, North Korea has a long history of human rights abuses. 10 years ago, the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the DPRK was established. The COI had issued a report concluding there were systematic, widespread, and grave human rights violations in the country. Since then, despite the relentless efforts of the international community to improve the rights of the North Korean people, the situation in the DPRK remains dire. The recent COVID-19 measures have only worsened the already precarious humanitarian situation. Severe economic hardship and malnutrition continue due to the diversion of resources to develop nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. And the draconian law adopted in 2020 further denies the right to information of the North Korean people. Simply watching or sharing South Korean movies is now punishable by death. This is no longer acceptable. North Korea needs to prioritize promoting the rights of its people rather than sustaining its regime. We also urge North Korea to immediately release South Korean nationals detained in the North. Mr. President, in closing, I wish to inform you that Korea submitted its candidature to the Human Rights Council for the term 2025 to 27. And we humbly ask the support of all member states. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor via video message to His Excellency Mr. Josep Borrell Fontelles, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Video, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, what are human rights? They are about the dignity of human beings, and they do not belong to any state. They belong to the people. They are universal. They apply to everyone, everywhere, without distinction. They are universal, indivisible, interdependent. This is what our United Nations member states stood for 75 years ago, when the Universal Declaration on Human Rights was adopted. And this was reconfirmed by all United Nations member states 30 years ago in the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. 30 years ago. Sadly, human rights are challenged more than ever around the world, all around the world, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from Belarus to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, from Myanmar to Ethiopia. We cover the 4 cardinal points. In Ukraine, almost 8 million have fled the country, the majority of whom are women and children. At least 6 million people are internally displaced and millions need humanitarian assistance. Russian attacks on civilians and civilian critical infrastructure amount to war crimes. The suffering must stop and perpetrators held to account. In Afghanistan, remember in Afghanistan, 2 years ago, the Kabul fall, the Taliban continue to systematically violate fundamental human rights of the Afghan people, particularly women and girls. They are denied their right to education, confined to their homes, and have no space in public life. This is a gender apartheid. 20 million Afghans, 70% of the population need humanitarian assistance. The European Union stands by Afghans, especially by Afghans women. In Iran, the death in custody of Mahsa Amini has shocked the world, not only the Iranians. And we have seen brave Iranians attempt to exercise their rights. And we are appalled by the use of the death penalty, both publicly and in my direct contact with the Iranian authorities. I have been calling for an end to these executions. Excellencies, no country and no region has a perfect human rights record. Certainly not. And that includes the European Union. Our member states have traveled a long and painful journey, especially in this 20th century. We wish to share those experiences and lessons learned. But let me be clear. We will not accept any violation of the United Nations Charter. We, the European Union, will not accept any justification for the discrimination of other human beings on whatever basis: nationality, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, or caste. All United Nations members have a duty to prevent and ensure accountability for human rights violations and abuses, no matter where they occur. Members of the Human Rights Council and of the United Nations Security Council have a particular obligation that comes with membership. We support High Commissioner Turk and the independency of his office. I welcome the High Commissioner's independent report on the human rights situation in Xinjiang and expect China to address their recommendations. Universality of human rights makes them not subject to negotiations. Indivisibility between ESC rights and civil and political rights, economic and socio-economic rights and civil and political rights, is neither subject to negotiation. Excellencies, multilateralism is essential to achieve global peace, security, and development. There is no country that can address global crisis alone. So let's make this 2023 the year in which we together turn the tide for human rights. That's the moment to do that. Let's engage, let's commit with this endeavor. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I have the honor to give the floor via video message to His Excellency. Oh, it's not video message, yeah? His Excellency Mr. Govinda Prasad Sharma Koirala, Advisor to the Prime Minister on Peace and Human Rights of Nepal. Your Excellency, you're welcome.
Mr. Vice President, Madam Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my great honor to address the high-level segment of the 25th session of Human Rights Council. Firstly, allow me to congratulate Mr. President for your election. I also take this opportunity to congratulate the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his appointment. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President, the suffering of the people in relation to enjoying human rights and human dignity continues to rise due to growing conflict and lack of fulfillment of basic needs of the people. As we are commemorating the 75th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we call upon the international community to realize and make concerted efforts for the universal promotion and protection of human rights. Mr. Vice President, the government reiterates Nepal's total and unequivocal commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. The Constitution of Nepal guarantees most of the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Under the Constitution, not only the civil and political right, but also economic, social, and cultural rights are made enforceable. In addition, the Constitution provides for a national protection of human rights system by establishing independent national institutions. Similarly, the Constitution guarantees judicial independence, rule of law, freedom of press, and civic speech, among others. Mr. Vice President, recently, Nepal successfully conducted free and fair periodic elections at all levels of the government. In line with the constitutional provision, we have been implementing inclusive principles to enhance the participation of the marginalized section of the society in the governance structure. For example, the elections have resulted in over 33% of women's representation in the federal and provincial parliaments and 40% at the local level. Mr. Vice President, Nepal's legal framework strictly prohibits sexual and gender-based violence. Harmful traditional practices against women and girls are outlawed. Sexual and reproductive health rights of women and girls are protected. We have also ensured the protection of the rights and identity of sexual minorities. We have pledged to eliminate child labor and child marriage. Caste-based discrimination is strictly prohibited by law, and such acts are being strictly investigated and perpetrators are brought to the justice. The Constitution guarantees freedom of religion as a fundamental right. We believe that freedom of religion cannot be impaired by any coercion or monetary inducement for conversion. Mr. Vice President, we have already put in place a gender-responsive budgeting system. Recently, the government launched a second National Action Plan for implementing the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and 1820 on women, peace and security. Nepal places great value on the safety, security and well-being of migrant workers, and we have been engaged in bilateral, regional and multilateral forums for the protection of their human rights. Despite the impacts of the COVID pandemic, climate change and other crises, Nepal is committed to achieve SDGs by 2030. We are set to graduate from LDC status by 2026. Nepal is committed to achieve net zero emission by 2045. Mr. Vice President, Nepal continues to remain engaged with the human rights bodies and mechanisms. We have been responding to communication and are committed to submitting periodic reports to the TT bodies. The government has launched combined 5th National Human Rights Action Plan 2022 to 2025 and implementation of the action plan of 3rd cycle of UPR recommendation 2021 to 2025. It is being implemented in collaboration with various stakeholders. The government of Nepal extending full support to all national human rights institutions, including National Human Rights Commission, to enable them to fully implement their mandates. Nepal is committed to ensure the compliance of the Paris Principle so that the National Human Rights Commission continues to enjoy its A status. Mr. Vice President, Nepal reaffirms its commitment to conclude the transitional justice process and provide justice and reparation to the victim of conflict. As we move towards establishing reconciliation in society, in this endeavor, we will be guided by the Comprehensive Peace Accord, the directives of the Supreme Court of Nepal, and the relevant international commitments, as well as the concerns by the victims. For this purpose, after conducting nationwide consultation with the relevant stakeholders, including the victims, amendment of the Enforced Disappearances and Truth and Reconciliation Commission Act 2021 was tabled in the Parliament in July 2022. Because of the expiry of the tenure of the Parliament, the bill could not get through. It is in the highest priority of the government, and the new amendment bill will be tabled in the Parliament soon. The amendment proposal recognizes reparation as a right of the victim. I assure you that Nepal has a capacity to conduct the peace and transitional justice process, giving full respect to aforementioned standards. Let me assure that under Nepal's transitional justice process, there will be no amnesty in the cases of serious human rights violation. Finally, Mr. Vice President, as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Nepal wishes to underline the importance of upholding the approach of genuine dialogue and cooperation on human rights agenda. States should adopt an objective, non-selective, and impartial approach and should refrain from politicization of human rights issues. In the Council, Nepal has been calling upon states to engage in diplomacy and dialogue and resolve disputes through peaceful means, and to protect human rights of all, including women, girls and children, under all circumstances while respecting international human rights and humanitarian laws. My delegation wishes a successful conclusion of this session. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor to Son Excellence, Madame Bibata Nibi Ouedraogo, Ministre de la Justice et des Droits de l'Homme, chargée des relations avec les institutions, garde-dessous de Burkina Faso. You have the floor, ma'am.
Monsieur le Président du
Mr. President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. High Commissioner for Human Rights, heads of delegations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, President. Allow me to extend my warmest congratulations to you on your assumption of the position of the President of the Human Rights Council, and to thank you and your entire team for the excellent work done in preparing for this session. My delegation assures you of its support and is confident that under your enlightened guidance, this session will reach a successful outcome. My congratulations also go to Mr. Volker Türk on his appointment as High Commissioner for Human Rights. Mr. High Commissioner, I wish you the best of success as you carry out your mission and assure you of the willingness of Burkina Faso to support you and cooperate with you throughout your mandate. Allow me to take this opportunity to especially commend the excellent cooperation that Burkina Faso has with the Office of the High Commissioner. This cooperation was reinforced with the signing of a headquarters agreement and led to the opening of an office in Burkina Faso, which we welcome. We also support the assistance provided on the ground, given the extremely difficult security situation in my country. Mr. President, this session takes place in a difficult international context, given challenges to human rights worldwide due to terrorism, the proliferation of hate speech, natural disasters, and numerous crises and conflicts. These phenomena test human rights and represent numerous challenges which cannot leave the international community indifferent. And therefore, my delegation would like to extend once again the condolences of the Burkinabe people and government to the people of Turkey and Syria, which were struck by the devastating earthquakes recently. Mr. President, Burkina Faso, since 2015, has had to face a security crisis marked by recurring terrorist attacks. This situation has led to human rights violations and an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. At the 31st of January 2022, more than 1 million IDPs were recorded, of which 58% women and children, and a significant proportion of women. More than 1 million students have been affected by the closure of over 1,000 schools. In order to face the situation of extreme vulnerability of internally displaced persons, the Burkinabe government has launched multiple initiatives focused on an integrated care and support provided to populations and families as well as host families. Despite the numerous efforts made by the government, however, in order to counter terrorism, the security situation remains of concern to the point where it now threatens the very foundations of the nation and the sovereignty of the state. This has led to a governance crisis, which led to a change in the governance of the state in January 2022. The new Charter of Transition developed by stakeholders focuses on 4 priorities: to fight terrorism and re-establish our territorial integrity, respond to the humanitarian crisis, re-establish the state, improve governments, and improve governance and social cohesion. Mr. President, Burkina Faso would like to reassure the international community that it is firmly committed to live up to its international commitments, in particular as regards the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as of its determination to ensure the independence and the proper functioning of the judiciary. As we seek to restore this territorial independence, we have recruited national forces and internal law enforcers by a decree of the 17th of December, seeking volunteers to defend the nation. This is a general mobilization of the sons and daughters of the nation, the expression of patriotism in order to voluntarily serve the interests of their villages or the areas where they reside, in support of the armed forces and the domestic law enforcement forces, which have been sorely tried by the terrorist attacks. On this matter, Burkina Faso would also like to reassure all of its partners that the regulatory provisions provide a strict framework for the recruitment of volunteers for the defense of the nation on its territories in order to ensure that this is carried out in strict compliance with human rights and human dignity. And for this purpose, a training program for the volunteers for the defense of the nation has been established and is being implemented. With the field office of the OHCHR in Burkina Faso, a training program for trainers for the volunteers of the defense of the nation is currently being carried out. My country is aware of human rights and the humanitarian principles as a basis for fighting terrorism. And this further strengthens the judiciary and institutional framework and regulates the intervention of the armed forces and the security forces. To this purpose, judicial bodies have been sent to the regions concerned, and there are also other advisors supporting these units in order to report and record any possible human rights violations, to hand down reports and ensure the rights of those detained during any of those operations. The Assembly has amended the Judicial Code in order to take into consideration the placement of security operations under judiciary control. The armed forces and security forces regularly receive instruction on the content of international humanitarian law as it applies to the running of security operations in the country. And finally, allegations of human rights violations committed in the framework of fighting terrorism are systematically investigated by the judiciary in order to properly pinpoint those responsible and, if necessary, ensure accountability. We would like to reassert our faith in multilateralism. This session, which this year is held under, as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, are of importance for all of us. In an international context marked by multidimensional crises which have a significant impact on humanity, these two historic events which have created the international humanitarian architecture are more than ever important. The principles of indivisibility and interdependence of human rights must remain the very foundation of our collective response to our contemporary challenges. It is time for the international community as a whole make a commitment to a forthright cooperation which is respectful of states. And it is only in this way that we will be able to guarantee that human rights are indeed enjoyed by all and that sustainable development be available to all nations. Thank you.
Excellency, thank you so much. I have the honor to give the floor to Ms. Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, by video message.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I'm honored to represent the Commonwealth at this eminent council. Our family of 56 nations, home to more than 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30, is bound by history, shared interests, practical advantages, and shared values. 11 Commonwealth countries serve as members of this council, and since the last high-level segment, we have welcomed Gabon and Togo into the Commonwealth family. Everything we do flows from our charter and from the mandates of our heads of government. 2023 is the 10th anniversary of our charter, and human rights are its lifeblood, a central obligation and a cornerstone of our wider commitment to peace, democracy, and the most vulnerable. At last year's Heads of Government meeting in Kigali, Commonwealth leaders reiterated their commitment to the Charter. They underscored the importance of the right to freedom of expression through peaceful, open dialogue and the free flow of information, including through a free, independent, responsible, and pluralistic media. They highlighted the vital role of a vibrant civil society, including human rights defenders, in delivering good governance and democracy. They emphasized the importance of cooperation between member countries and national human rights institutions, and they ratified the Kigali Declaration on Childcare and Protection Reform, which seeks to protect Commonwealth children from all forms of discrimination and abuse, and enable them all to enjoy their civil, political, social, and cultural rights. In pursuance of these mandates, the Commonwealth Secretariat provides our member states with wide-ranging assistance, and we are proud to have enhanced our partnership with this Council, the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, and with the whole international system. Indeed, our small states office in Geneva and New York enables continuous engagement with international institutions for the Commonwealth's 33 small states, 2/3 of the global whole. Mr. President, this Council meets at a time when the world is under immense pressure. We are tightly bound by a tangled knot of crises spanning global systems, the social, political, and economic consequences of COVID-19, crippling debt, rising inflation, and high interest rates, spiraling costs for food and energy, tremors of instability and conflict, and the increasingly harsh impacts of climate change. These are grave challenges. They interconnect, entwine, and worsen one another, and they require a level of international, political, and economic cooperation which is unprecedented in this century. All of us know that political, economic, environmental, and security crises threaten human rights. Systems can become overstretched, resources and attention can be diverted, and where rights are threatened everywhere, the most vulnerable are threatened exponentially. Women and girls are at greater risk of violence. Children are at greater risk of abuse, trafficking, forced labour, and forced marriage. People with disabilities are at greater risk of isolation, and people with protected characteristics are at greater risk of marginalisation. Mr. President, in the face of these harms, our international human rights frameworks are amongst our strongest tools. They are the legal and political expression of our humanity, our compassion, and our commitment to each other. And they must be at the heart of our collective action. This underlines why the work of this Council is of such primary importance, and I commend this Council's role in advocating for a global rights-based approach to combating climate change. The recommendations, decisions, and mandates which flow from this Council can change the world. We have seen it before, and we will see it again. So I urge you to be bold, because it is in the most difficult moments that the biggest difference can be made. The work of this Council can act as a vital safety net for the most vulnerable people, communities, and nations in our global family. And nothing could be better demonstrated that the doubters of multilateralism are wrong than success in that endeavour. Action from this Council can spark action around the world to protect those whose rights are threatened and can enable everyone everywhere to live more peaceful, purposeful, and prosperous lives. Mr. President and members of this eminent Council, in the pursuit of this most noble cause, you will always have a willing partner in me and in the whole Commonwealth Secretariat.
Thank you. I have the honor to give the floor to Ms. Mirjana Spoljevic-Egger, President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we mark two important anniversaries. Both are testaments to our common humanity. And it's 75 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights it is 75 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. For the first time, the Declaration enshrined a set of indivisible human rights that should be universally protected. And this year, the International Committee of the Red Cross turns 160 years. Over the decades, the ICRC has relieved suffering and promoted international humanitarian law that sets out the minimum standards of humanity in armed conflict. It is an impressive milestone, and one we should be proud of. These two anniversaries affirm the enduring relevance of international humanitarian law and international human rights law that are there to protect people and communities in times of armed conflict. Yet we urgently need to do more to enshrine and ensure their universal respect. It is evident, as on my recent visits to Ukraine, Mali and Syria, that armed conflicts continue to ruin the lives of millions. In Ukraine, I saw devastated cities, uprooted families and shattered lives. In Mali, I saw women and children struggling for survival against the deadly combination of conflict, climate shocks and the major food crisis. In Syria, I saw communities ravaged by years of fighting, suffering once again amid the destruction of the recent earthquake. In addition to the resurgence of international armed conflict in Europe, we are facing an accelerated convergence of global trends. The impacts of massive displacement, rising inequalities and new technologies of warfare, such as cyber operations and autonomous weapons, is growing by the day. Authoritarian rule that disregards fundamental rights and universal norms, both at national and international levels, is on the rise. And human rights violations and war crimes are being committed every day with impunity. In times of armed conflict, both international humanitarian law and international human rights law set rules and obligations for states towards a common purpose: to protect the lives, health, and dignity of the people, and to preserve our shared humanity, even in the most dire circumstances, such as being protected from ill treatment when detained by an enemy state. These bodies of law are the best tools for states to ensure that the most vulnerable and most marginalized are protected from violence, arbitrariness, and discrimination. The International Committee of the Red Cross and the Human Rights Council work towards a common goal: to ensure states respect and uphold these rules. Our work is complementary and mutually reinforcing, yet with different approaches. The ICRC builds trust through confidential dialogue with all sides, based on principles of neutrality and independence. The Human Rights Council provides a public forum for reflection on interpretation, implementation of the laws, and accountability in the face of complex crises and challenges. At the time when multilateralism is challenged, the Human Rights Council represents a vital space for exchange. Today, my calls on states are urgent. Recognize your existing obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Preserve and spare no effort in implementing these laws, a hard-won and increasingly rare consensus which protects us all. Ensure that the needs and the rights of the most marginalized and discriminated people are addressed and protected, including in situations of armed conflict and violence. And preserve the space for neutral, impartial, independent humanitarian action. For the ICRC, it is our neutrality and our consequent ability to speak to all parties which allows us to access all people in need. My goal as President of the ICRC is to make international humanitarian law a political priority, again, for all parties to the Geneva Conventions, because I truly believe in their preventive character. International humanitarian law reduces the cost and human suffering caused by armed violence. It is our responsibility as the parties to the Geneva Conventions. It is your responsibility as the parties to the Geneva Conventions to prevent the escalation of bloodshed and misery. Each day you succeed in elevating respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law, you are preserving our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished participants, this was the last speaker on my list for this meeting. We will now have a short technical break and reconvene at 3 p.m. to continue with the high-level segment. I hereby close the 5th meeting of the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council.